jumping in with Mac and Mac. We thank our next guest for doing just that as well. You recognize him for the work he does on TV on NBC Sports Philly. You got to be reading him all the time, NBCSportsPhilly.com. And check out the Eagle Eye podcast with our buddy Ruben Frank. Good to get David Zangaro back up with us again here on Birds 365. Dave Z, I haven't talked to you. How was your New Year?
It was good, man. How about you?
I worked. I was on the air. When the ball dropped, I had it on TV. But
extra
I was on the
ships,
radio at the
man.
time.
Holidays means extra ships. That's how it works.
Exactly. Dave, I asked this question of bud of yours from yesteryear, our very own Derek Gunn, just a half an hour ago. You're a guy who's there every single day, following the team. You get a good grasp on Mojo. And if I need to explain Mojo to you, I will. I don't think I do. I think you understand.
He saw Austin Powers, I assume. He knows. Dave knows.
Yeah, Austin Powers, one of my all-time favorite movies. Thanks for referencing that, John. Understanding what Mojo is. How is the Eagles' Mojo now that they finished 14-3 with a little bit of a stumble down the stretch, injuries and issues and the like, but with a week to wait to find out who they play and then get ready to prep and get some downtime and rest? Where's the Eagles' Mojo at right now?
That's a fair question. I think that, most teams would rather go into the playoffs with a full head of steam and playing their best football. And that's not the case for the Eagles. We get that. But I also got the sense that, once they did what they wanted to accomplish, they kind of feel like, okay, now we're in a really good spot. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't questions about this team and about the health of the team, which is my biggest concern at certain areas. But I feel like they just accomplished what they wanted to do. It took them longer to get there. They should have had it wrapped up earlier than they needed, or than they needed to get it wrapped up. But, I don't sense that they're worried about not having momentum going into the playoffs and that sort of thing. Would you like to have it? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to win every game. You want to have that good feeling.
Yeah.
But I don't get the sense that they're thinking, oh, man, we're really not playing well right now. We're going to be in trouble. I don't get that sense at all.
Yeah, either do I, Dave. And I'll go more style points than Mojo. I mean, you don't get extra wins for those style points. They were able to get the number one seed, which was the goal. And boy, I can't remember a year where it's been set up more nicely, shall we say, for the number one seed. The top threat, at least on paper, would be San Francisco, which is a very good team, but they're starting a third-string rookie quarterback who's done a tremendous job, but he's still a third-string rookie quarterback. I mean, that's pretty good. You look at Tampa Bay. I was just looking at the PFF grades for the year. Tampa Bay is one of the worst teams in football. The Giants are even worse. When you look at the film, they're right there with the Chicago Bears and the Houston Texans of the world when they're looking at talent. And people talk about them getting potential upsets in the first round. The Eagles have 4 potential playoff opponents. Do any of them scare Dave Zangaro?
No. I mean, of those 4, I think the one that your circle is the Cowboys, just because Dak has been very good against the Eagles, but they're also a different team away from AT&T. I mean, they're not the same when they play here. So I mean, they're the team that, if you're asking me, which is the toughest draw in the divisional round, it's them. I don't think they scare you. I mean, I think the Cowboys are a very beatable team. They stand out to me just because they have very talented players on both sides of the ball. Whereas, some of the teams in the playoffs are kind of really one way or the other. Even the 49ers are very balanced, right? You think of them as having a great defense, but they have really good offensive players too. The Cowboys have a little bit of that, but they're also the Cowboys, and it's January, and I know that shouldn't matter, but it kind of feels like it does. And until they prove to me that they're not going to recoil and be the Cowboys of the last 20 years in the playoffs, and I don't know if they really scare you that much.
Dave, 2-part question. And the first one is either, if you've got an exact number, feel free to affix it. If not, I need your general opinion on it. How often do the Eagles, with Jalen Hurts as their quarterback, allow him to audible different plays on the line of scrimmage?
That's tricky to come up with a number because in addition, it's not just like he's at the line and he picks a play. There are sometimes checks based on the coverage, right? So it's not like that's what makes it really tough to tell you exactly like what the number is, because there are times where, he's reading a player on the defense and gives a check because of it. Is that really him audibling? No, it looks like he does sometimes, but he has a little bit of autonomy. But they also give him some on zone reads and RPOs where, yes, there are like definitive black and white reasons to pull it or to throw it or to hand it off or to keep it, but it's not going to be 100% all the time, right? So I think that's what you're looking for is like, what's the autonomy number for Jalen Hurts in this offense? And I have no clue how to give that to you.
Right. That's why I said if he had attached a number, I'd love it. Didn't think you could. It was it's a hard question.
I would if I felt like I had a way to do it. It's just there's so many different elements.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between a modern NFL offense versus the old school. Certain guys, if you go back to 20, 30 years, would run the game from the line of scrimmage. If you go back to the 70s, I mean, guys like Terry Bradshaw and Fran Tarkenton and Ken Stabler called their own plays. It doesn't exist anymore. So I think, the Eagles have built this offense and you have options. There's 2 or 3 plays sometimes you can kill from one play to another. I don't think that old school sort of autonomy exists anymore, really. Maybe Tom Brady, but I think it's almost becoming extinct. Do you see it around the rest of the league, Dave?
Not really. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like even when Jalen audibles, he doesn't have the full menu.
Yeah.
It's like, if they show this look, this is the play. If they show this look, this is the play. Which makes sense. You have really smart. It will be a lot for any quarterback in this NFL to just have the menu at the line of scrimmage, especially for a guy in his second year as a starter. So, and it's why they pay Shane Steichen a lot of money to call these plays.
Yeah. He's got to get more money soon. Maybe.
As you could probably guess, the reason I'm asking the question is this past week, with him returning from injury, Jalen Hurts' plays did not look like Jalen Hurts plays of the level of potential MVP in the National Football League. Much more aggressive, taking off, making plays with his legs. It didn't happen this week. Understandably so, because he's coming back from the injury and they want to make sure that they want to get him re-injured before the playoff starts. More so the actual play calling coming down ahead of time, Jalen's decision within the play where he decides what he's going to do with the football, as you just kind of documented for us. If we can all agree that it was not truly Jalen-like in the way that the plays played themselves out this past Sunday, why? Who was the main reason that it was a less Jalen running game than we're used to seeing?
The coaching staff. Even when Jalen made those wise decisions, that's the coaching staff, and he's hearing the coaching staff tell him, get down, get down, get down. Because I think Jalen on his own he wants to play the way he wants to play. The play calling certainly is all the coaching staff. I mean, they weren't going to expose him. I mean, there were no design runs. The read option game wasn't there. And it's something to watch. I think once they got in the red zone, we really saw that without the threat of his legs, this red zone offense is not the same. So when I mentioned the thing that concerns you about this offense going into the playoffs, or about this team going into the playoffs, is the health. I mean, that's number one on my list is how healthy is Jalen Hurts going to be? And is his health going to allow them to call the game the way they want to call the game and the way he wants to play the game? I think a lot of this was precautionary in week 18, because in the playoffs, you can't do that. I mean, you can't have the play calls we saw in week 18 in the playoffs. You just can't do it, whether he's hurting or not. I mean, you just have to play to win the game. You have to do whatever it takes. So you hope that this extra week gives him a chance to heal up a little bit more. And he can get out there and be the guy we saw leading up to this, because it was frustrating to watch. I mean, there was even the one play he slides before the first down.
Yeah,
You're going, holy cow, he's really taking this to heart. And you appreciate that from him, because that probably kills him inside. And we saw that after the game, him trying to talk about it. If there's one thing Jalen Hurts doesn't want to talk about, it's him being injured or him playing differently because of an injury. But I give him credit for doing it in this game, because they clearly asked him to.
Yeah, and we talked about that word fear. I don't fear anybody in the playoffs. I guess my biggest fear would be Nick Sirianni. I mean, you and I are with him all the time, Dave. I mean, he talks the way he talks about injuries. He's talking, when Jalen first got it, we had the superhero talk. Oh, he heals better than everybody else. And then he comes out after the game and he said, I know he was hurting. He was hurting bad. I was surprised by that. I was surprised he went that far. And that concerned me a little bit. But you mentioned you thought he was being precautionary. It was a bad opponent. It was the junior varsity of a team that doesn't match up with you with their starters. In the playoffs, you can't play like that, right? I mean, even if he is banged up, you got to go win the game. So I think you're on the same page with me in that aspect of it. They have to play. Even if he's banged up, they got to put the zone read stuff back in the game plan, correct?
Oh, you have to. It changes so much. I always go back to that Tennessee game. I don't think I've ever seen a defense play a quarterback the way they played him. And it was just such a testament to how good he's been with his legs. I mean, they stopped pass rushing in that game because they were so worried about him taking off. If you don't have that threat, I think Jalen's still a good quarterback. He's proven that he can play from the pocket, but it's not even about him running. It's about the threat of him running.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
If you don't have that, the numbers change up, and it gives the defense an advantage against this offense. So, and this offense isn't particularly complex.
No.
I
say it all the time. People think it's the simplest offense.
It's
really
a very
is.
simple offense,
Yeah.
and that's fine. Like I don't have a problem with that because they have good players and they have a quarterback that changes his numbers, and it should be simple. And I think it's wise that it's simple. But if you lose such a big element of that offense, and now you have this simple offense, it can become predictable in a hurry, and that's the biggest fear. You can't have that happen. So, yeah, I'm with you, John, because what are you saving him for? If you got to call the plays, you got to put the read option stuff back in there. I think you don't have to go crazy with it, but it has to be there. The threat of it has to be there.
Dave, last night on WIP, I tried to get Eagle fans to take a step back and look at the 17-game season rather than just the 3-game season the Eagles played these last 3 weeks, 2 of which were without Jalen Hurts, by the way, to try and take a big picture look. But I do need to now focus on this past game in one aspect, and I think it's important going forward because it's injury related. And that is real. Miles Sanders was very healthy in week 2. What does it mean now? Nada. Because he's not 100% healthy now. He's been practicing with a knee brace. Your buddy, Reuben Frank, told me last night he didn't wear it in the game on Sunday, and he also didn't run the ball near as effectively as he has all year. How much is Miles' knee a factor going into the postseason? Am I overstating the worry on this, or is it legit?
I think there's a little bit of worry there. He's been limited the last 2 weeks because of it. So that's where this is one of the injuries that I really feel like a week off can help quite a bit. There are some, is a week off for Lane going to matter? I don't know. I mean, it's one less game of wear and tear. That helps. But for an injury like Miles' injury, I think the week off really will help. I don't know if he's going to be 100% for the playoffs, but I think he'll be good enough. And that's not great. I get that because he was so healthy for so much of the season and it mattered. It was the first time we've seen him be this healthy,
right?
Really since his rookie season. So, yeah, it's a shame that he got hurt late in the year. But, if you're looking for one guy who this bye week's really going to benefit, Miles Sanders is at the top of the list for me.
Yeah, one positive piece of injury news was CJ Gardner-Johnson, Dave. They threw him back into the pool, man. 100%. I didn't see that coming. And they used him in multiple roles, sort of like they were using Avante at the end before he was injured. So, when they played base, he was back at his normal safety position. Then he was in the slot when they needed a nickel back. He's a big part of that defense. He's, I joked, what does CJ and Dak Prescott have in common? They both lead the league in interceptions and they both missed 5 games, which is, yeah. He's been a tremendous playmaker. All good from that perspective. He looked completely healthy.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of those things where it's like if the lacerated kidney is healed,
it's healed.
He's healed. He's good to go. You don't worry about re-injury there, I guess. He played well. I thought he was very active. He looked good up near the line of scrimmage. He's played a ton there, so that wasn't a surprise. And the Eagles clearly feel better with Reed Blankenship at safety than they do Josiah Scott at nickel, which I'm fine with. I get that. And having just some kind of stabilizing force in the middle of the field is going to mean a lot, because over the last couple of games before week 18, they were really susceptible in the middle of the field. And we saw Kaiser have 2 really bad games.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's all on Kaiser. And by the way, he played, I thought, his best game of the year.
He did. He had a tremendous bounce back.
But in the previous 2 games, he was getting picked apart in coverage, and they were really throwing it at him a lot. And I just think a lot of that was just the absence of Avante Maddox. Because in these zone coverages, like the spacing in the middle of the field matters so much. And when you have different pieces out there, it kind of gets all out of whack. So CJ being back, I think, will just really stabilize the middle of the field, because teams are still going to shy away from throwing outside when you have Bradbury and Slay, and they're going to try to find the middle of the field. And if CJ's in there, not only can he stop that, but he can make a big play here and there, and that would be a huge difference.
Dave, John and I discussed this briefly early in the show yesterday before we had the later in the day announcement that actual requests have been put out for Eagle coordinators to interview for head coaching positions. Working under the assumption that one, if not both of the guys, are going to get head coaching jobs in the league. One by one, who is the top candidate to replace? We'll go Shane Steichen first. Where do you think the Eagles look and or make a aggressive decision if Steichen gets a job somewhere else? Who's going to be the top candidate to be the new offensive coordinator?
Well, they might need to promote Brian Johnson just to avoid losing him.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he's going to be a hot candidate for offensive coordinator jobs. And he's in the building. And I think Nick likes the idea of promoting within. He hasn't had to do it yet, really. We saw some lower level assistants get promoted, but I think he likes that idea. We know the Eagles like it to a certain extent. Now, if they get depleted and they feel like there's not enough talent in the building, here comes Rich Scangarello again, trying to replenish. But I think Brian Johnson will be the top internal candidate, but there's also Kevin Patullo, who's their pass game coordinator, kind of Nick Sirianni's right-hand man. He's the guy on that coaching staff we probably don't talk about enough.
Oh, yeah. He was going to be the head coach when Nick got COVID.
He was going to take over head coach. We forgot about that. Yeah. He's going to take over head coaching responsibilities. So those 2 guys in-house make the most sense. Of course, Frank Reich doesn't have a job. And if he doesn't have a job, I think that's always going to be a possibility. We know what Nick thinks of Frank. And Frank doesn't have, I think some head coaches would have an ego problem going back to work for one of their former understudies and being under them. I don't think Frank that wouldn't be a problem for Frank ego-wise. Now, would that happen? I don't know. Or then another name, Marcus Brady, who has been working with the Eagles, consulting Jonathan Gannon, was Frank's offensive coordinator after Nick Sirianni. I think that one's probably a little less likely, but there are some.
That was an interesting move, bringing him in to help the defense. I thought that was an interesting tweak by the Eagles.
And it's hard to know what he's doing, but it makes sense.
All right, and the other half of the question was, who's going to replace Gannon? If Gannon goes elsewhere, internal, external, I threw out Vic Fangio's name a couple of weeks ago just because it made too much sense. And he did visit the Eagles during training camp, made one of those glad-handing walkthroughs and talked to absolutely everybody. Sean Payton is kind of on record saying, if I get a gig, I'm going to try and get Vic Fangio to be my defensive coordinator. So that could thwart the Eagles. But interior, exterior, who's going to take over if Gannon goes elsewhere as a head coach?
Sure. I mean, Fangio would be ideal. I mean, this defense is it's not a Fangio defense, but it comes from the Fangio defensive tree, so to speak. So that would be an easy transition. If you're looking internal, Denard Wilson, defensive backs coach, I think I'm actually surprised he hasn't been given more looks around the league. I think he could be ready for a jump. And then kind of an outside the box one, maybe just because he's so young, but Nick Rawlis,
Yeah,
the
Nick,
linebackers
they
coach.
love Nick. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if he won't be a hot name coming up soon for other teams. And he's young. I mean, gosh, I don't think he's 30 yet, but
No, yeah. He was the youngest position coach in the league when he got the gig.
He'll get there eventually. I wouldn't worry if I'm Nick Rawlis. Like, it'll come. But he's another one that I think might make some sense. And one that I would be interested in, I don't think they are. Jeremiah Washburn, to me, is just a fascinating guy. I think, and the Eagles have used him in so many different ways over the years.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, I think that guy can kind of do whatever he wants. And I think he would make a good DC. I don't think they'd go that way. Like, I'm putting together lists, actually. It's nice. I had this teed up. I'm putting together lists of, like, options. But now I don't have him on there, but he would be on my mind if I were them. I don't think he is.
Yeah. And, I think Nick is very, and you know this, Dave, he's, I think he really enjoys he's going to enjoy the promotion aspect. Like, he wants to groom guys. Like, he always talks about Alex Tanney on the offensive side as a
that's
young
a clear
coach.
Progression too. You can see Shane leaves, Brian gets promoted, Alex Tanney is now the quarterback's coach.
Yeah. So I think he really enjoys that part of it.
And then in 3 years, Jeff will fire him because he wants to make.
Exactly. Yeah, because
I like it.
Hey, you win the Super Bowl, the standards go up. So, and then you need a scapegoat when things go wrong. If one, Shane's percentage wise, he's in the lead. He's got, there's 5 openings. 3 of them want to talk to Shane so far. I'm surprised Denver's not on that list yet. And Gannon has been mainly Houston, but people down in Houston think, he might have gotten the job last year if they showed the courage of their convictions, or Josh McCown. Who do you think is more likely of the two to be a head coach?
I'll play the numbers and say Shane Steichen, but I think the interest in Gannon last year in Houston was very real, but I am not in the business of trying to predict what the Houston Texans are going to do.
Good point. Yeah, you were down there.
I have like, that organization is a mess.
But they got that weird Cleveland thing going on. Like Cesario's he's John Carroll, that weird pipeline. And John Gannon didn't go to John Carroll, but it's Cleveland area. They got this weird connection where they're all like, but Jonathan Gannon was hired before, as you know, Dave, he was hired before Nick Sirianni. He was going to come in here as the defensive coordinator. Josh McDaniels got the job. Another sort of John Carroll, Cleveland weird thing. It's kind of like a cabal with those Cleveland guys.
It's the NFL Illuminati. Yeah, it is kind of weird. I don't know what Houston's going to do. That organization's such a mess. And Shane might have options. Who knows? Like, Shane might have a couple teams like very interested in him, and we'll see how the timing works out. And by the way, like, I think Jonathan Gannon could be a pretty good head coach.
Oh yeah,
I think
he's a great leader.
He has that part of it down. And I know people get concerned about his scheme at times, but you need more than that to be a successful NFL head coach.
One of the cliches I've always bought into, there's a million cliches around the NFL, and with coaching, You got that. If you're hiring a scheme, you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's about leadership. It's about teaching. More so. I'm not saying you don't need a scheme, but more so, I think the leadership part of it, the getting people on the same page, I think that's a bigger part of it.
Yeah, it is. And it's, Nick's kind of been that. Obviously, this is his scheme offensively, but turning over play calling,
Yeah.
I think that kind of shows that there's a bigger value to the head coaching job than just being a coordinator.
Let me make a bold prediction here. When Jonathan Gannon gets a head coaching job, because I think it's a when, not an if, but it could be Houston this year, might be one of the other jobs. When that happens, if by the second year in charge as the head coach, the defense is fourth most all-time sacks in the history of the National Football League in that new town, they won't be complaining about he's not aggressive enough. They'll just go, wow, we're fourth all-time in sacks. That is such a Philly thing. It's not going to happen anywhere else on the planet the way it does here in Philadelphia. But we'll get to that when Gannon actually does get out of town. All right, here's the question I've got for you, Dave, about where the Eagles sit right now. Got an entire week to do as they please. Days off, except for, as you noted on NBC Sports Philly, Jalen Hurts said, no, I'm coming in to watch film. Hey, coach, you got to meet me at the facility. We got to do some film breakdown on an off day. So God bless Jalen for that. But they get a couple days, take their time, heal up for the guys that are injured. The one thing that Sirianni said on WIP that made me laugh, we're going to get some great practices in. They don't ever get great practices in. What the hell are you talking about? Your estimation of a great practice. Well, in those great practices, what are they actually going to do, Dave Z?
They're going to run their own stuff. And they're just going to run it kind of basic, but they'll run it because like game planning makes no sense right now. You have four possibilities. Now they have coaches that are working on it. Like this is where the lower level coaches make their money. I mean, they'll split them up and they'll say, all right, you and you deal with the Cowboys, you guys, Bucks and all that. And they'll work ahead that way. They'll advance scout those teams, but you can't game plan for four teams at once. So it's basically get your fundamentals down. And we talked to Jason Kelsey after the game, and he said he appreciates this time because he gets to just worry about his technique and little things that he can rewatch his film and see what he's doing wrong, kind of regardless of what the defense is doing. So that's what they'll use it for. And it is valuable. And you have this time, you might as well try to get the most value out of it as you can while you heal up.
Yeah, it is. It's tremendously valuable because everybody else has got to play, and they got to play in the playoffs, and it's do or die. And when they shifted to 14 teams in the playoffs, Dave, and they scaled it back from 1 first round bye to 2 first round, from 2 to 1. I mean, that's everything, right? That is everything. The road to the Super Bowl goes through Lincoln Financial Field. There's got to be a sense of urgency, right? The Eagles have to take advantage of this spot. We talked about the coaching staff, the number 1 seed. You don't always happen. That's one of the things I shake my head about. Not all Eagles fans, but certain Eagles fans. They set a franchise record for wins. They have a top 5 offense, a top 5 defense. Don't get used to this. This is special this season.
It's special. And in the back of my mind is like, look at all these free agents too. You don't know when you'll be back in this spot.
No. And I always go back to Dan Marino. It was his second year he made the Super Bowl, and he said, it was pretty easy for him. I think he threw for 5,000 yards that year. I'll be back. Never got back. Never. And that's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Understood.
Enjoy this run because it's not going to happen every year.
Last one for me, Dave. I had John look up before the show started where Pro Football Focus ranked the job that the Eagles replacement right tackle did this past week. I got my own eyes. I watched it. I didn't think Jack Driscoll played all that well. He was like the 9th highest rated Eagle player out of the 22 guys that started, which is not terrible. It's kind of middle of the road.
9th on offense. He was not.
9th on offense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was 9th of the 22. All right, so that's not good. So my eyes did not deceive me. I didn't think he had a great game. Anytime you're replacing Lane Johnson, there's going to be a drop-off. There's no way you're holding up that standard when you're a backup player like Driscoll. But he hasn't even been as good as I thought he might be. Did the Eagles even contemplate getting Mailata some snaps at right tackle just in case this week? If Lane comes back, if Lane re-injures himself, or are they just going to live and die with Jack Driscoll the rest of the way?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad idea to get him a few. Because that Lane injury, everyone's hoping he can play through it. It's going to be tough. And it just is. It's a tough injury to play through. All your power comes from your abdomen when you're a player, especially an offensive lineman. So even if he plays, I don't know if he's going to be Lane, but 75% of Lane, you take that over the alternative. So he's going to try to tough it out. It's not a bad idea. I think they're going to roll with Driscoll, and they don't help him a ton either.
No.
They kind of just say, well, we'll live with that.
Yeah.
He's going to get beat sometimes. We'll live with that. It's scary at times because you're like, help him out. Give him.
It's interesting, Dave. That's my one criticism of this coaching staff. I think, next man up mentality is good for, optimism, and, you got to treat the guys. I always say coaches have to be optimistic, right? You can't be like, oh, woe is me. Jack Driscoll's got to play. You can't act like that as a coach. You got to say, hey, next man up, go out and do it. But you also got to protect guys and realize it's all the same thing with 3rd and 30. That Tampa 2 sort of invert defense, that would have worked probably with Devonta. You don't ask Josiah Scott to do that.
You don't want Josiah to have to cover that much ground?
Yeah.
Sprinting back at a sprinter's pace. Yeah, no, that didn't quite work out, right?
I mean, Jack Driscoll, you don't expect him to be Lane Johnson. You might say, hey, Jack, go be Lane Johnson. But behind the scenes, you're like, we got to help Jack out a little bit.
It's tough because that's what makes this offense kind of tick is having 2 tackles.
Yeah.
You don't have to help. Even Mailata hasn't had a great year, but they don't help him. Those tackles are out there on islands, and for the most part, they don't get beat that often.
No.
So if you have to start chipping a ton, it just changes the numbers. And the Eagles are all about the number game on offense. That's why they love Jalen on the backside, right? It's like if you can affect the numbers positively, you're going to be pretty aggressive, and you're going to kind of put your foot to their throat. And when you have to keep helping a tackle, it kind of changes that a little bit.
Dave, tell us when the latest Eagle Eye podcast was either just posted or the next one's going to be posted for the people who enjoy your work with Ruben Frank on the podcast.
We are recording Tuesday, today, 2 p.m. So we'll have Tuesday, Thursday, and then we're going to do one after we find out who the heck the Eagles are going to play next week.
Understood. We'll be listening. We appreciate you jumping in with us today. We'll get you on during the playoffs again as well, buddy. Thanks.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thanks,
Dave Zangaro, NBC Sports, Philadelphia, jumping in with us here on Birds. Johnny Mac, Jody Mac coming back. Oh, we're going to put a bow on the show.